各位听众您好，这里是 iGo News， 欢迎收听美国晨间新闻会诊孔雀台观点。
Hello there, this is iGo News. Welcome to our U.S. morning news summary from a Peacock Channel perspective.
早安，各位。
Good morning, everyone.
今天我们为您带来有关白宫竞选的最新深度报道。
Today, we bring you in-depth coverage of the latest developments in the race for the White House.
随着选举日即将到来，总统候选人之间的激烈对决不断升温，这次选举的重要性前所未有。
With Election Day just days away, the country is seeing an intense showdown between the presidential candidates, and the stakes have never been higher.
各阵营正加倍努力推进竞选活动，医疗保健、移民和妇女权利等重要国家议题成为焦点。
Each camp is doubling down on campaign efforts, while key national issues like healthcare, immigration, and women's rights take center stage.
现在，让我们深入探讨塑造此次选举周期的关键点，看看候选人如何处理重大问题以及近期双方言论引发的争议。
Now, let's get into the major points shaping this election cycle as we look at how candidates are addressing critical issues and the controversies surrounding recent remarks from both sides.
首先，我们从副总统卡马拉哈里斯开始，她最近的亮相引发了媒体的高度关注，尤其是在她批评前总统唐纳德·特朗普的言论后。
We begin with Vice President Kamala Harris, whose recent appearances have drawn significant media attention.Especially after her comments criticizing former President Donald Trump.
在一次集会中，哈里斯针对特朗普，无论女性是否愿意，都要保护他们的言论做出评论。
At a rally, Harris remarked on Trump's statement about protecting women whether they like it or not.
他的原话是：大多数美国人认为女性足够聪明，应该有权决定自己的最佳利益，并得到尊重，不应由政府，更不用说唐纳德·特朗普。告诉他们该怎么做。
In her words, and I quote, "The majority of Americans believe that women are intelligent enough and should have, and be respected for their agency to make decisions for themselves about what is in their best interest and not have their government, and certainly not Donald Trump, telling them what to do."
他的言论强调了哈里斯竞选活动中的一个核心主题：女性的权利和自主性，特别是在生育权方面。
Her statements emphasize a recurring theme for the Harris campaign, women's rights and autonomy, particularly as it pertains to reproductive rights.
这次选举重新引发了有关罗素韦德案 Roe v. Wade 及其对生殖健康政策更广泛影响的讨论。
This election has reignited discussions around Roe v. Wade and the broader implications of reproductive health policies.
哈里斯的言论是对特朗普有争议立场的直接回应，他在内华达的集会中重申了这一立场。
Harris's comments were a direct response to Trump's controversial stance, which he reiterated during his rally in Nevada.
特朗普在对群众演讲时表示，他会保护女性，即使他们不同意他的做法。
Trump, while addressing the crowd, mentioned that he would, in his words, protect women.Even if they disagreed with his approach.
此言论引起了多方面的审查和批评，包括倡导团体和政治分析人士，他们认为这代表着对女性权利更广泛的冲突。
This remark has drawn scrutiny and criticism from various quarters, including advocacy groups and political analysts, who see it as emblematic of a broader clash over women's rights.
同时，唐纳德·特朗普的竞选活动依然聚焦于移民、国家安全和经济等议题。
Meanwhile, Donald Trump's campaign remains focused on issues like immigration, national security, and the economy.
在亚利桑那的一场集会中，特朗普重申了他对移民改革的承诺，特别是针对他所描述的让美国家庭和工人处于危险之中的破碎体系。
During a rally in Arizona, Trump re-emphasized his commitment to immigration reform, specifically targeting what he described as a broken system that puts American families and workers at risk.
他的言论引起了那些将国家安全和就业保护视为投票决定关键因素的选民的共鸣。
His remarks resonate with a substantial segment of his voter base who prioritize national security and job protection as key factors in their voting decisions.
然而，这种强硬立场也招致了一些人批评，认为这是分裂性的。
But this hardline approach also draws considerable criticism from those who see it as divisive.
在言论中，特朗普还将矛头指向了长期批评他的共和党人前怀俄明州国会议员利兹·切尼。
Adding to the rhetoric, Trump turned his attention to his longtime Republican critic Liz Cheney, former Congresswoman from Wyoming.
他表示，切尼应手持一把带有9个枪管的步枪来面对挑战。
He made statements implying that Cheney should stand with a rifle with 9 barrels pointing at her.
切尼回应说，这种言辞令人深感担忧。他将特朗普的做法比作独裁者的手段。
Cheney has responded, stating that such language is deeply concerning, equating Trump's approach with that of dictators.
他说道，这就是独裁者如何摧毁自由国家。他们威胁反对者，甚至威胁到对方的生命。我们不能将国家和自由交给一个小气、报复心强、残忍、不稳定且妄图成为暴君的人。
She remarked, "This is how dictators destroy free nations. They threaten those who speak against them with death. We cannot entrust our country and our freedom to a petty, vindictive, cruel, unstable man who wants to be a tyrant."
切尼的言论强烈谴责了特朗普的领导风格，并揭示了共和党内部的深刻分裂。
Cheney's words reflect a strong condemnation of Trump's leadership style and underline the deep rift within the Republican Party itself.
许多知名共和党人已经与特朗普的言论保持距离，但也有一些公开支持他。
Many prominent Republicans have distanced themselves from Trump's rhetoric, even as others have openly backed him.
特朗普的言论在社交媒体上引起了反响，网络影响者和评论人士纷纷对他有关女性的言论发表意见。有些人认为他的语气反映出对性别角色的过时观点。
Trump's rhetoric also stirred responses on social media, where influencers and commentators weighed in on his comments about women, with some asserting that his tone reflects a dated view of gender roles.
然而，还有一些人为他辩护，声称他的言论反映的是对保护的重视，而非控制。
Others, however, defended him, claiming his statements reflect an emphasis on protection rather than control.
在这场争议中，哈里斯的竞选活动正抓住机会争取女性选民的支持。
Amidst this controversy, the Harris campaign is capitalizing on the moment to galvanize support from women voters.
问题在于，这一策略能否成功吸引更多女性走向投票站？
The question remains, will this strategy succeed in drawing more women to the polls?
副总统还强调了他在医疗保健方面的立场，这是他和特朗普之间鲜明对比的领域。
The vice president has also highlighted her stance on healthcare, an area of sharp contrast between her platform and Trump's.
在这次选举中，医疗保健是许多选民的首要议题。哈里斯承诺保护并扩大平价医疗法案，也就是所谓的奥巴马医改。
This election, healthcare is a primary issue for many voters, and Harris has pledged to protect and expand the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare.
在最近的一次集会中，他表示，医疗保健是一项权利，而不是特权。我们不能倒退。
During a recent rally, she stated, "Healthcare is a right, not a privilege. We cannot go backward."
哈里斯的言论凸显出他与特朗普在如何处理美国医疗体系方面的根本差异。
Harris's remarks underline a central difference between her and Trump on how to handle America's healthcare system.
哈里斯支持加强平价医疗法案的条款，以确保更广泛的覆盖范围和更低的处方药费用。
Harris supports enhancing ACA provisions to ensure broader coverage and lower prescription costs.
相比之下，特朗普多次批评奥巴马医改，称其成本过高，并承诺提出替代方案。
In stark contrast, Trump has repeatedly critiqued Obamacare, calling it too costly and promising an alternative.
然而，他尚未提供具体细节，让一些选民感到怀疑。
However, he has yet to provide specific details about what his healthcare plan would entail, leaving some voters skeptical.
特朗普还因他声称，如果当选，亿万富翁罗伯特 ·F. 甘乃迪将在他的政府中担任重要角色，负责监管卫生机构而引起关注。
Trump also drew attention for his remarks that billionaire Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would have a significant role in his administration if elected, overseeing health agencies.
RFK Jr. 以对疫苗的怀疑态度闻名，这一提议的任命引发了公共卫生官员的担忧，他们担心卫生政策可能会发生转变。
Known for his skepticism of vaccines, RFK Jr.'s proposed appointment has raised concerns among public health officials who worry about a potential shift in health policies.
本周，影响力人士的参与在各竞选活动中的作用也发生了新的变化。
The involvement of influential figures in the campaigns has also taken a new turn this week.
在拉斯维加斯，副总统哈里斯与珍妮弗·洛佩兹一同亮相，旨在激励拉美裔选民，并在拉美裔人口影响巨大的州份加强支持。
In Las Vegas, Vice President Harris was joined by Jennifer Lopez, an effort to galvanize Latino voters and bolster support in a state where the Latino demographic has considerable influence.
哈里斯选择让洛佩兹在这次活动中出现在聚光灯下，并非偶然。
Harris's choice to bring Lopez into the spotlight at this event was not coincidental.
洛佩兹作为自豪的波多黎各人，利用这一机会提醒观众团结在一起实现变革的重要性。
Lopez, who proudly identifies as Puerto Rican, took the opportunity to remind the audience of the importance of standing together for change.
同时，洛佩兹的出现恰逢喜剧演员托尼·辛克利夫在特朗普集会上发表针对波多黎各的冒犯性笑话之后，这凸显了副总统对拉美裔社区的承诺。
At the same time, her presence on the Harris campaign comes only days after comedian Tony Hinchcliffe made an offensive joke about Puerto Rico during a Trump rally, bringing attention to the vice president's commitment to the Latino community.
接下来，提前投票数据在全国范围内飙升。
Moving on, early voting numbers are surging across the country.
数千万张选票已经投出，显示出强劲的投票热情。
Tens of millions of ballots have already been cast, reflecting a strong voter turnout.
双方竞选活动密切关注这些数据，将最后的努力重点放在摇摆州的味觉选民上。
Both campaigns are monitoring these numbers closely, focusing their final efforts on undecided voters in battleground states.
内华达、宾夕法尼亚和威斯康星等州的提前投票量很大，表明这次选举可能会打破以往的投票记录。
States like Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are seeing high volumes of early votes, an indicator that this election could potentially break previous turnout records.
尤其是威斯康星州，成为双方候选人最后冲刺拉拢选民的焦点。
Wisconsin, in particular, is a focus for both candidates as they make last-minute stops to court voters.
今天，副总统哈里斯计划参访密尔瓦基的一家工会大厅，随后在亚特兰大、夏洛特和底特律举行的投票行动集会。
Today, Vice President Harris is scheduled to visit a union hall in Milwaukee, followed by Get Out the Vote rallies in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Detroit over the weekend.
哈里斯的竞选活动不放过任何机会，旨在触及各类议题，以吸引工人阶级选民，特别是那些工会化程度高的行业。
The Harris campaign is leaving no stone unturned, aiming to address a wide array of issues to resonate with working-class voters, especially in heavily unionized sectors.
同样，特朗普也计划访问关键的摇摆州，作为最后动员支持者的努力。
Similarly, Trump is scheduled to visit key battlegrounds as part of a final push to galvanize support.
今天早上，他的竞选活动在内华达和亚利桑那继续进行。
This morning, he continues his campaign trail with stops in both Nevada and Arizona.
他的议程仍然重点关注经济问题，特别是通胀、就业保障和贸易政策。
His agenda remains heavily focused on economic issues, with particular attention to inflation, job security, and trade policies.
特朗普一再批评拜登政府的经济政策，称其导致物价上升和高通胀。
Trump has been a vocal critic of the Biden administration's economic policies, which he says have led to rising prices and high inflation.
他主张美国优先的政策，声称这将优先考虑美国的就业，保护国内产业，并确保经济稳定。
He is advocating for an America First approach, which he claims will prioritize American jobs, protect domestic industries, and ensure a stable economy.
然而，经济学家发表了不同的意见。有些人指出，影响经济的因素主要是全球性的，而非仅仅是美国的政策。
Economists, however, have voiced differing opinions, and some point to global factors affecting the economy rather than solely U.S. policy.
哈里斯的竞选活动则回应说，经济动荡是由全球事件造成的，例如疫情和当前的中东冲突。
In response, Harris's campaign argues that the economic turmoil is a result of global events such as the pandemic and the current conflict in the Middle East.
哈里斯捍卫了拜登政府在经济方面的处理，指出就业率的改善、基础设施投资和可再生能源领域的进展。
Harris has defended the Biden administration's handling of the economy, citing improvements in employment rates, infrastructure investments, and progress in renewable energy sectors.
他强调，他的政府将专注于经济改革，以在拜登的成就基础上进一步发展。
She has emphasized that her administration would be focused on economic reforms that would build on Biden's successes.
在相关发展中，社交媒体和赌盘的影响成为关注焦点。像 Twitter 这样的平台，现在改名为 X， 显示出特朗普在选举中的赔率提升。
In a related development, the influence of social media and betting markets has become a topic of interest, as platforms like Twitter, now rebranded as X, feature election odds that show Trump gaining momentum.
最近，有人对特朗普选举胜利下注2800万美元，引起广泛关注，特别是关于赌盘是否会对选民的选举观念产生影响的担忧。
A recent $28 million wager on Trump's victory in the election has raised eyebrows, especially with concerns over whether betting markets can unduly influence public perception of the election.
专家警告说，尽管赌盘不能视作民调，但他们可能会创造影响味觉选民的叙事。
Experts warn that while betting markets should not be taken as polls, they can create narratives that influence undecided voters.
这些平台加上传统媒体，在塑造选举相关内容中发挥了前所未有的作用，引发了关于假讯息及其可能改变公众舆论的问题。
These platforms, alongside traditional media, are playing an unprecedented role in shaping election-related content, raising questions about misinformation and its potential to alter public opinion.
副总统哈里斯在最近的讲话中简要提到这一问题，强调了可信来源和负责任媒体报道的重要性。
This is an issue that Vice President Harris briefly touched upon in her recent address, stressing the importance of verified information sources and responsible media reporting.
哈里斯专注于媒体的诚信和真相，呼吁选民审视所读所闻，敦促他们关注事实而非噪音。
Harris's focus on media integrity and truth is an appeal to voters to scrutinize what they read and hear, urging them to stay informed on the facts rather than the noise.
这次选举正在成为美国历史上的决定性时刻。
This election is shaping up to be a defining moment in U.S. history.
双方在关键问题上划清界限，最终的决定将取决于选民认为哪位候选人的愿景最符合他们的价值观和利益。
With each side drawing clear lines on key issues, the decision will come down to which candidate voters believe has a vision that aligns with their values and interests.
最终，这场竞选强调了每一票的力量以及所涉及议题的分量。
At the end of the day, this race underscores the power of each vote and the weight of the issues at stake.
这是这个迅速发展的故事的最新消息，双方都在为选举日的最后冲刺努力。
And that's the latest on this rapidly unfolding story as both sides rally for a final push to Election Day.
我们将继续为您带来最新的报道，随着白宫竞选的推进，持续提供深入报道、独家采访和实时分析。
We'll continue to bring you the latest updates as the race for the White House moves forward.
今天我们为您带来有关中东局势的全面更新。近期事件已显著加剧了紧张局势，并引起了国际关注。
Today, we bring you comprehensive updates on the situation in the Middle East, where recent events have significantly heightened tensions and drawn international attention.
随着冲突加剧，平民伤亡增加，高级美国官员正积极寻求调解和平，同时也在应对这些情势对美国外交政策带来的挑战。
As conflicts intensify and civilian casualties mount, senior U.S. officials are actively seeking to mediate for peace, while also navigating the diplomatic challenges that these situations bring to U.S. foreign policy.
首先来看看以色列与黎巴嫩之间的暴力升级。
Let's start with a focus on the escalating violence in Israel and Lebanon.
在最近从黎巴嫩向北部以色列发射的导弹袭击中，7名以色列人丧生。
7 Israelis were killed in recent missile strikes fired from Lebanon into northern Israel.
这是本月初以色列军事进攻南黎巴嫩以来最致命的跨境袭击之一。
This marks one of the deadliest cross-border attacks since Israel's military incursion into southern Lebanon earlier this month.
真主党部队在黎巴嫩境内加强了军事行动，引发了人们对两国之间可能发生长期冲突的担忧。
Hezbollah forces have increased their military activities from within Lebanese borders, leading to concerns about a prolonged conflict between the two nations.
作为回应，以色列空袭持续针对黎巴嫩的真主党据点，尤其是在东部城市巴勒贝克附近发生了最猛烈的轰炸。
In response, Israeli airstrikes have continued to target Hezbollah strongholds in Lebanon, with some of the heaviest bombings seen near the eastern city of Baalbek.
以色列官员下令对该地区进行全面撤离，这标志着以色列在打击真主党的行动中采取的更为激进的措施。
Israeli officials ordered a full-scale evacuation of this area, marking an intensified approach in their efforts to combat Hezbollah.
以色列国防部队也专注于加沙，试图遏制暴力的扩散。
Israeli defense forces, in an attempt to stem the flow of violence, are also focused on Gaza.
他们对关键基础设施进行了空袭。最近的一次袭击摧毁了北加沙最后一所仍在运营的医院，影响了平民获得基本医疗服务的渠道。
They've conducted airstrikes on critical infrastructure, most recently striking the last functioning hospital in northern Gaza, which has impacted civilian access to essential health care.
这些不断加剧的空袭凸显了局势的严峻。以色列部队继续针对他们所称的由真主党和哈马斯使用的军事设施。
These ongoing strikes underscore the severity of the situation, as Israeli forces continue to target what they describe as military installations used by Hezbollah and Hamas.
然而，平民伤亡逐渐成为令人担忧的问题，激起了停止战火的呼声。
Civilian casualties, however, are becoming a growing concern, sparking calls for a ceasefire.
实现和平的努力充满挑战。
Efforts for peace are proving to be challenging.
美国派出了2名高级外交官前往该地区与主要领导人会面，探索促成临时停火的可能性。
The United States has sent 2 senior diplomats to the region to meet with key leaders and explore the possibility of brokering a temporary ceasefire.
白宫中东和北非事务协调员布雷特·麦格克与资深能源安全顾问阿莫斯·霍克斯坦与以色列总理内塔尼亚胡会面，讨论实现降级的可行途径。
Brett McGurk, White House Coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa, and Amos Hochstein, Senior Advisor for Energy Security, met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss viable paths toward de-escalation.
起初，人们对这些会谈的成功抱有乐观态度。
Initially, there was optimism that these talks might yield an agreement.
然而，最近的报道显示，这些外交官已返回华盛顿，原因是他们面临了相当大的障碍。
However, recent reports suggest that the diplomats have returned to Washington after facing considerable obstacles.
他们离开该地区被视为谈判暂时停滞的迹象，因为目前双方在现行条件下仍不愿意承诺停火。
Their departure from the region is seen as a sign that talks may have stalled, at least temporarily, with both sides still unwilling to commit to a ceasefire under current conditions.
黎巴嫩总理本周早些时候也发表了评论，表达了对谈判停火的希望。
Lebanon's prime minister also weighed in earlier this week, expressing hope that a ceasefire could be negotiated.
然而，随着双方的袭击再次升级，这种乐观情绪很快消散了。
This optimism, however, quickly faded after the renewed attacks from both sides.
真主党领导人继续强烈反对以色列在黎巴嫩边境附近的存在，明确表示他们目前并不认为外交手段是可行的解决方式。
Hezbollah leaders continue to voice strong opposition to Israel's presence near Lebanon's borders, making it clear that they do not see diplomacy as a viable solution at this stage.
这种情绪反映了地区的复杂性，历史上的积怨加剧了当前的冲突，使谈判异常困难。
These sentiments reflect the complexities in the region, with historical grievances fueling modern-day conflicts, making negotiations exceedingly difficult.
另一起复杂情况中，以色列情报部门最近报告称伊朗存在潜在威胁，表明伊朗部队正准备再次对以色列进行打击，以回应上周对伊朗军事设施的空袭。
In an added complication, Israeli intelligence recently reported potential threats from Iran, indicating that Iranian forces are preparing to strike Israel again in response to last week's airstrikes on military installations within Iranian borders.
伊朗革命卫队指挥官公开声称复仇不可避免，引发了伊朗可能在美国总统选举前采取军事报复行动的担忧。
Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps commander publicly stated that retribution is inevitable, raising concerns that Iranian military retaliation could come soon, potentially before the U.S. presidential election.
伊朗的反击也可能影响油价，导致全球市场的连锁反应，可能会波及到美国消费者。
An Iranian counterattack could also impact oil prices, leading to a ripple effect on global markets that might hit American consumers as well.
伊朗准备进行报复，部分原因是以色列最近的战略性打击。这些打击针对了伊朗的关键军事设施，包括一个防空系统。
Iran's readiness to retaliate is partly due to Israel's recent strategic strikes, which targeted key Iranian military assets, including an air defense system.
以色列部队成功打击了伊朗境内的多个地点，造成严重破坏。据报道，有4名士兵丧生。
Israeli forces successfully hit multiple locations in Iran, causing substantial damage and reportedly killing 4 soldiers.
这是近年来以色列对伊朗领土进行的最重要袭击之一。专家认为，这将影响伊朗在考量报复选择时的决策过程。
This marks one of the most significant strikes by Israel on Iranian territory in recent years, and experts believe that it will shape Iran's decision-making process as they weigh their options for retaliation.
除了直接的威胁外，以色列和伊朗双方也意识到此类行动在全球舞台上的更广泛影响。
Beyond the immediate threats, both Israel and Iran are aware of the broader implications that such actions would have on the global stage.
此时若对以色列资产进行打击，将会促使以色列迅速回应，并可能引发美国的干预。
A strike now, especially one targeting Israeli assets, would prompt a swift response from Israel and could involve U.S. intervention.
美国在该地区有多个利益，包括与沙特阿拉伯和以色列的盟友关系。华盛顿官员正密切关注局势。
The U.S. has several interests in the region, including alliances with both Saudi Arabia and Israel, and officials in Washington are closely monitoring the situation.
拜登总统已对伊朗发出警告，提醒其避免加剧局势，但分析人士指出，伊朗不太可能因此受到下阻。
President Biden has issued warnings to Iran, cautioning against escalation, though analysts suggest that Iran is unlikely to be deterred.
同时，加沙和约旦河西岸的紧张局势持续升温，那里的人道主义情况变得严峻。
Meanwhile, tensions continue to escalate across Gaza and the West Bank, where the humanitarian situation has become dire.
医院和应急服务机构不堪重负，难以处理受伤人员并管理持续空袭所带来的健康影响。
Hospitals and emergency services are increasingly overwhelmed, struggling to treat the injured and manage the health impacts of sustained airstrikes.
国际援助组织已指出，这种不断恶化的情况极为危急，援引医疗用品、食品和饮用水短缺为主要关注点。
International aid organizations have flagged the deteriorating conditions as critical, citing shortages in medical supplies, food, and potable water as key concerns.
为应对这一危机，副总统卡马拉哈里斯对加沙的平民伤亡表示关切，并一直在倡导采取人道主义的方式来解决这一局势。
In response to this crisis, Vice President Kamala Harris has voiced concern over civilian casualties in Gaza and has been advocating for a humanitarian approach to address the situation.
他在最近的一次竞选活动中表示，我们必须保持人道主义原则，保护平民。这包括保障医疗设施，确保援助到达需要的人们，并努力朝着和平的道路迈进。
During a recent campaign appearance, she stated, "It is essential that we maintain humanitarian principles and protect civilians. This includes safeguarding medical facilities, ensuring aid reaches those in need, and working toward a path to peace."
哈里斯的言论凸显出美国政策中的平衡行为。拜登政府在寻求支持以色列的同时，也呼吁保持克制。
Harris's comments highlight a balancing act in U.S. policy, as the Biden administration seeks to uphold its support for Israel while also calling for measured restraint.
拜登总统对中东冲突的立场相当复杂，该政府在美国内部不同派系的压力下进退两难。
President Biden's stance on the Middle East conflict has been complex, with the administration facing pressure from various factions within the United States.
一些国会成员主张对以色列实行武器禁运，认为美国的武器正在加剧加沙的平民伤亡。
Some members of Congress are advocating for an arms embargo to Israel, arguing that U.S. weapons are contributing to the civilian toll in Gaza.
相反，支持以色列的强大游说团体则继续强调美国支持其盟友对抗所谓的恐怖威胁的必要性。
Conversely, a strong pro-Israel lobby continues to emphasize the need for the U.S. to support its allies against what it describes as terrorist threats.
联合国也已介入，秘书长安东尼奥·古特雷斯发表声明，敦促双方缓和局势，允许人道援助到达受影响地区。
The United Nations has also become involved, with Secretary General Antonio Guterres issuing a statement urging both sides to de-escalate and allow humanitarian aid to reach affected areas.
古特雷斯强调扩大冲突的后果，指出暴力升级可能会破坏更广泛的地区稳定，影响到约旦、埃及和叙利亚等邻国。
Guterres highlighted the consequences of an expanded conflict, noting that increased violence could destabilize the broader region, affecting neighboring countries like Jordan, Egypt, and Syria.
随着国际局势的变化，土耳其和沙特阿拉伯也表达了他们对这场冲突的立场，各自呼吁进行外交干预。
Adding to the international dynamics, Turkey and Saudi Arabia have voiced their positions on the conflict, each calling for diplomatic interventions.
土耳其总统埃尔多安提议调解以色列和巴勒斯坦之间的和平谈判，尽管以色列的初步反应颇为冷淡。
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan proposed mediating peace talks between Israel and Palestine, though Israel's initial response has been dismissive.
沙特阿拉伯也呼吁谨慎，强调地区稳定对其自身安全利益至关重要。
Saudi Arabia, too, has urged caution, emphasizing that regional stability is critical to its own security interests.
这两个国家认识到，冲突扩大将引发难民危机，干扰贸易路线，并破坏中东脆弱的政治平衡。
Both nations recognize that a wider conflict would create a refugee crisis, disrupt trade routes, and destabilize the Middle East's fragile political balance.
作为更广泛国际应对的一部分，欧盟宣布将向加沙的巴勒斯坦平民提供援助，承诺资金支持和紧急资源。
As part of a broader international response, The European Union has announced that it will be providing aid to Palestinian civilians in Gaza, pledging financial support and emergency resources.
欧盟高级代表约瑟夫·伯雷尔发表声明，呼吁立即停止敌对行动，强调无辜生命不应成为附带损害。
The EU's High Representative, Josep Borrell, issued a statement calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities, stressing that innocent lives must not be collateral damage.
欧盟还重申其对两国解决方案的支持，敦促联合国加强在谈判长期和平进程中的努力。
The EU has also reiterated its support for a two-state solution, urging the United Nations to step up its efforts in negotiating a long-term peace process.
美国选民也密切关注这些事件，外交政策成为即将到来的总统选举中的一个重要议题。
American voters are also paying close attention to these events, with foreign policy becoming a significant issue in the upcoming presidential election.
对于一些选民，尤其是那些在该地区有家人关系的人，这场冲突具有深层的个人意义。
For some voters, especially those with family ties to the region, the conflict is deeply personal.
民调显示，美国公众意见分歧，有许多人支持以色列的自卫权，另一些人则呼吁更多关注巴勒斯坦人的权利。
Polls indicate that the American public is divided, with many supporting Israel's right to defend itself, while others call for more attention to Palestinian rights.
这种分歧也体现在两位总统候选人的回应上，双方对于如何最好地处理该情势持有截然不同的观点。
This division is also reflected in the two presidential candidates' responses, with each offering contrasting views on how best to approach the situation.
前总统唐纳德·特朗普表示，如果当选，他将采取更强硬的方式，强调保护美国在该地区的利益和盟友的重要性。
Former President Donald Trump has stated that he would take a more assertive approach if elected, emphasizing the importance of protecting American interests and alliances in the region.
特朗普称拜登的外交政策软弱，认为其政策助长了伊朗等对手的气焰。
Trump has described Biden's foreign policy as weak and claims that it has emboldened adversaries like Iran.
特朗普的外交政策立场吸引了那些支持强硬干预主义方法的选民，他们认为这是平衡该地区崛起的势力所必须的。
Trump's foreign policy stance appeals to a segment of voters who favor a strong, interventionist approach to U.S. interests abroad, seeing it as a necessary counterbalance to rising powers in the region.
另一方面，哈里斯则呼吁采取更平衡的方法，注重外交和与国际盟友的合作。
On the other hand, Harris has called for a more balanced approach, focusing on diplomacy and collaboration with international allies.
他批评特朗普在第一个任期内处理中东事务的方式，认为他的政策导致关系紧张，阻碍了和平解决的潜力。
She has criticized Trump's handling of Middle Eastern affairs during his first term, arguing that his policies led to strained relationships and hindered the potential for peaceful resolutions.
哈里斯倡导多边讨论和与欧洲盟友的紧密合作，强调需要长期解决那些持续数十年的冲突。
Harris has advocated for multilateral discussions and closer cooperation with European allies, emphasizing a need for long-term solutions to conflicts that have persisted for decades.
回到华盛顿，有关以色列军事资金和加沙外援的讨论仍在继续。
Back in Washington, discussions around military funding for Israel and foreign aid for Gaza are ongoing.
国会正在辩论是否应分配额外资源以支持以色列的防御系统，如铁穹系统，同时也在权衡向巴勒斯坦平民提供人道主义援助的需求。
Congress is deliberating over whether additional resources should be allocated to support Israel's defense systems, like the Iron Dome, while also weighing the need to provide humanitarian support for Palestinian civilians.
这一问题凸显了国会内的两党分歧，民主党和共和党对美国资源应如何分配持有不同的观点。
This issue has brought to light the bipartisan divide within Congress, with Democrats and Republicans voicing contrasting views on how U.S. resources should be directed.
在中东，没有简单的答案， 这一复杂的历史冲突、政治联盟和人道主义问题的网络仍在挑战全球领导人。
There are no easy answers in the Middle East, and this complex web of historical conflicts, political alliances, and humanitarian concerns continues to challenge leaders across the globe.
美国的角色至关重要，因为其行动可能对国际稳定和经济市场产生深远影响。
The role of the United States remains pivotal, as its actions can have far-reaching consequences on international stability and economic markets.
我们将继续跟踪事态发展，并带来最新的更新。
We'll continue to monitor the situation as it develops and bring you the latest updates.
在这样的时刻，外交至关重要。我们将拭目以待美国及其国际盟友如何在中东事务的复杂格局中应对。
In times like these, diplomacy is essential, and it remains to be seen how the United States, along with its international allies, will navigate the intricate landscape of Middle Eastern affairs.
这是一个不仅影响地面上的人们，还塑造全球政治方向、触动世界各地生命的故事。
This is a story that impacts not only the people on the ground, but also shapes the direction of global politics, touching lives worldwide.
这就是我们对中东冲突的最新报道。
That concludes our latest coverage on the Middle East conflict.
请继续关注我们的深入报道、独家访谈，以及有关海外局势可能如何影响国内政策决策及全球舞台的进一步分析。
Stay with us as we bring you further analysis and insights into how the evolving situation abroad could impact policy decisions here at home and influence the global stage in the weeks and months ahead.
我们聚焦影响即将到来选举的主要国内问题，包括经济发展、就业趋势、医疗保健和劳动力相关的辩论。
We focus on key domestic issues shaping the upcoming election, from economic developments and employment trends to healthcare and workforce debates.
距离选举日仅剩几天，两位主要候选人正进行最后的拉票，各自专注于影响美国家庭的关键问题。
With just days until Election Day, both major candidates are making last-minute appeals, each focusing on issues that hit home for American families.
首先，我们来看看最近的经济发展。
First, let's look at the recent economic developments.
今早，劳工部发布了10月份的就业报告，显示美国经济上月仅新增了12000个就业岗位，远低于预期的10万个。
This morning, the Labor Department released its October jobs report, showing that the U.S. economy added only 12,000 jobs last month, significantly below the expected 100,000.
这标志着1年多来最疲软的单月就业增长之一。经济学家对假日季的经济稳定性提出疑问。
This marked one of the weakest monthly job growths in over a year, leading economists to raise questions about the economy's strength as we head into the holiday season.
多种因素导致了这一数据，包括飓风海伦和米尔顿对一些重要州的影响，以及波音持续的罢工，约有44000名工人仍在罢工中。
Several factors contributed to these numbers, including the impacts of Hurricanes Helen and Milton, which affected key states, and the ongoing strike at Boeing, where approximately 44,000 workers are still on the picket lines.
自9月以来的罢工已经终止了波音设施的生产，导致10月制造业出现显著的就业损失。
The strike, ongoing since September, has halted production at Boeing facilities, causing significant job loss in the manufacturing sector for the month of October.
虽然一些经济学家认为这次就业增长下滑可能是暂时的，但低数据显示经济整体增长的步伐正在放缓。
While some economists believe this decline in job growth may be temporary, the low figure does hint at a slowing pace in overall economic expansion.
尽管就业增长放缓，全国失业率仍稳定在 4.1%。
Despite the slowdown in job growth, the national unemployment rate held steady at 4.1%.
工资年同比上涨 4%， 超过了目前 2.4% 的通货膨胀率。
Wages rose 4% year over year, outpacing inflation, which is currently at 2.4%.
这一工资增长意味着许多美国人的收入增速超过生活成本的增长， 这对于经历了数月高通胀压力后来说是一个积极的指标。
This wage growth means that many Americans are seeing their income grow faster than the cost of living, a positive indicator after months of high inflationary pressures.
然而，这些经济趋势为候选人带来了机会和挑战，两人都将自己定位为解决当前经济困境的方案。
Nevertheless, these economic trends present both opportunities and challenges for the candidates, each of whom has positioned themselves as a solution to current economic woes.
副总统卡马拉哈里斯强调稳定工资增长的必要性，并倡导措施来提高可负担住房的可及性，降低食品价格，并扩大对工薪家庭的经济支持计划。
Vice President Kamala Harris has emphasized the need for steady wage growth while advocating for measures that would increase access to affordable housing, reduce grocery prices, and expand economic support programs for working families.
他还强调政府自疫情以来的创造就业纪录，并将其方法定位为优先考虑可持续增长和工资稳定的做法。
She also highlights the administration's record on job creation since the pandemic, framing her approach as one that prioritizes sustainable growth and wage stability.
他在最近的一次演讲中说：“我们的政府通过重视劳动力发展、降低处方药价格和支持小企业，为经济复原奠定了基础。我们不仅在复苏，更在重建一个更公平的经济。”
During a recent appearance, she said, "Our administration has laid a foundation for economic resilience by focusing on workforce development, lowering prescription drug prices, and supporting small businesses. We're not just recovering, we're rebuilding a fairer economy."
相比之下，前总统唐纳德·特朗普在竞选活动中采取了不同的语气。
In contrast, former President Donald Trump has taken a different tone on the campaign trail.
他将当前的经济挑战归因于他所描述的政府过度干预，并认为最近的通胀和高利率源于华盛顿的管理不善。
He attributes the current economic challenges to what he describes as government overreach, and has argued that recent inflation and high interest rates stem from mismanagement in Washington.
特朗普的立场是，放松管制和减税将使企业受益，刺激招聘，并最终将更多资金注入美国家庭。
Trump's stance is that deregulation and tax cuts will empower businesses, stimulate hiring, and ultimately bring more money into American households.
他最近的演讲聚焦于所谓的繁荣蓝图，承诺在下一个任期内通过减少政府干预能源和技术等行业创造1000万个工作机会。
His recent speeches have focused on what he calls a blueprint for prosperity, pledging to create 10 million jobs in his next term by reducing government intervention in sectors like energy and technology.
特朗普还推行抑制政府开支的政策。
Trump is also promoting policies that would curb government spending.
这包括他支持的联邦招聘冻结措施。他认为此举将资源重新分配给私人企业。
This includes his support for a federal hiring freeze, which he argues will redirect resources to private businesses.
他建议聘请知名人士，如科技公司 CEO 埃隆·马斯克来负责重大预算削减，包括每年计划削减2万亿美元的联邦支出。
He has suggested enlisting prominent figures like tech CEO Elon Musk to oversee substantial budget cuts, including a proposed $2 trillion annual reduction in federal spending.
特朗普主张这一措施将减少国债，减轻美国人，尤其是中等收入人群的税负压力。
Trump argues that this move would reduce national debt and ease the tax burden on Americans, especially middle-income earners.
接下来，我们转向医疗保健议题，这也是选民关注的另一个重要焦点。
Next, let's turn to the issue of healthcare, another major focus for voters.
副总统哈里斯和前总统特朗普对美国医疗保健的未来提出了截然不同的愿景。
Vice President Harris and former President Trump present markedly different visions for the future of American healthcare.
哈里斯承诺保护并扩展平价医疗法案 ACA， 通常称为奥巴马医保，目标是让每个美国人都能获得更可负担的医疗服务。
Harris has promised to protect and expand the Affordable Care Act, ACA, often referred to as Obamacare, aiming to make healthcare more accessible and affordable for every American.
他计划投资于公共卫生计划，承诺每个美国人都应享有优质、负担得起的医疗权利。
She plans to invest in public health initiatives, promising that every American deserves the right to quality, affordable health care.
哈里斯还公开支持加强女性医疗权益，提倡保障生殖健康服务的政策。
Harris has also been vocal about strengthening women's health care rights, advocating for policies that secure access to reproductive health services.
他认为特朗普的医疗保健方法将剥夺基本的保护措施，并限制那些最需要他的人的可及性。
She contends that Trump's approach to healthcare will strip away essential protections and limit access for those who need it most.
相比之下，特朗普批评 ACA， 称其成本过高且限制过多。
In contrast, Trump has criticized the ACA, labeling it too expensive and restrictive.
他提议用一种成本更低且更简化的替代方案来取代奥巴马医保，尽管他尚未提供具体计划。
He proposes to replace Obamacare with a less costly and more streamlined alternative, though he has yet to provide detailed plans.
特朗普还表示，如果当选，他将任命以持有争议疫苗观点而闻名的罗伯特 ·F. 肯尼迪二世领导卫生与公共服务部。
Trump has also suggested that if reelected, he would appoint Robert F. Kennedy Jr., known for his controversial views on vaccines, to head the Department of Health and Human Services.
这一任命可能意味着联邦健康政策出现重大转变，特别是在儿童疫苗接种计划和心理健康服务等领域。
This appointment could mean a significant shift in federal health policy, particularly in areas like childhood vaccination programs and mental health services.
特朗普认为，肯尼迪在公共卫生领域的倡导经验使他有能力帮助改革我们的健康体系，解决慢性病问题。
Trump argues that Kennedy's experience as a public health advocate makes him well suited to help reform our health systems and address issues of chronic disease.
除了医疗保健，这次选举的另一个主要议题是围绕重返办公和灵活工作安排的持续辩论。
Beyond healthcare, a major issue in this election is the ongoing debate over return-to-office mandates and flexible work arrangements.
包括亚马逊和星巴克在内的许多公司正推动员工每周回到办公室工作3到5天。
Many companies, including Amazon and Starbucks, are pushing for employees to return to in-person work 3 to 5 days a week.
亚马逊最近宣布计划在明年恢复每周5天的工作制，而星巴克则要求公司员工每周至少在办公室工作3天。
Amazon recently announced plans to reinstate a full 5-day workweek by next year, while Starbucks is enforcing a 3-day minimum for corporate staff.
然而，根据调查，近一半的美国员工更希望能每周部分时间在家工作。77%表示，如果被强制完全回办公室，他们将考虑辞职。
According to surveys, however, nearly half of American employees prefer to work from home part-time, with 77% indicating they would consider quitting if mandated to return to a fully in-office schedule.
这种紧张局势引发了关于工作的未来以及职业生产力与个人福祉之间平衡的全国性讨论。
This tension has sparked a national conversation about the future of work and the balance between professional productivity and personal well-being.
哈里斯表达了对灵活工作政策的支持，认为远程工作选项可以提高员工的士气和生产力。
Harris has expressed her support for flexible work policies, arguing that remote work options can boost employee morale and productivity.
同时，特朗普则持更传统的立场，倡导办公室协作的好处。
Meanwhile, Trump has taken a more traditional stance, advocating for the benefits of in-office collaboration.
特朗普建议他将对支持传统工作模式的企业实施税收优惠，称美国是在强大的劳动力基础上建立起来的，面对面的协作能量无可替代。
Trump has suggested that he would implement tax incentives for businesses that support a return to traditional work models, claiming that America was built on the strength of its workforce and nothing replaces the collaborative energy of working together in person.
在金融领域， 美联储的货币政策仍是焦点，因为它直接影响着利率和美国人的借贷成本。
In the financial sector, the Federal Reserve's monetary policy remains in focus as it directly affects interest rates and borrowing costs for everyday Americans.
最新数据显示，美联储在即将召开的会议上可能会暂停加息。
Recent data shows that the Fed will likely pause interest rate hikes in its upcoming meeting.
在过去1年中，美联储已经加息了11次以应对高通胀，这一举措使得抵押贷款、汽车贷款和信用卡的借贷成本增加。
Over the past year, the Fed has raised interest rates 11 times to combat high inflation, a move that has increased borrowing costs on mortgages, auto loans, and credit cards.
虽然这项政策成功遏制了通胀，但也使得家庭在购置房屋和汽车等大宗商品时更加困难。
While this policy has successfully slowed inflation, it has also made it more challenging for families to afford big-ticket purchases like homes and cars.
哈里斯对高利率表示关切，呼吁采取一种稳定经济而不给工薪家庭过重负担的平衡方法。
Harris has expressed concerns about high interest rates, calling for a balanced approach that stabilizes the economy without overburdening working families.
他最近倡导联邦计划，支持首次购房者，以帮助他们缓解更高的抵押贷款利率带来的成本压力。
She recently advocated for federal programs that would subsidize first-time homebuyers, helping to ease the cost burden for those facing higher mortgage rates.
而特朗普则认为美联储在加息方面应该采取更轻松的方法，声称激进的加息阻碍了经济增长。
Trump, however, has argued that the Fed should have taken a lighter touch approach to interest rate hikes, claiming that aggressive rate increases have stunted economic growth.
特朗普还指责拜登的经济政策是导致通胀上升的因素之一，并提出逆转许多这些政策以恢复经济自由和机会。
Trump has also pointed to Biden's economic policies as a factor in driving inflation, and has proposed a reversal of many of these policies to restore economic freedom and opportunity.
在选民动员方面，两个竞选团队都在进行最后的努力，以鼓励投票。
In terms of voter mobilization, both campaigns are making last-minute efforts to encourage turnout.
哈里斯专注于与历来投票率较低的群体互动，包括少数族裔群体、年轻选民和女性。
Harris has been focused on engaging communities that have historically had lower voter participation rates, including minority groups, young voters, and women.
本周，他与女演员詹妮弗·洛佩兹等高调支持者一起出席了一系列集会和选民登记活动，旨在激励提前和邮寄投票。
This week, she appeared alongside high-profile supporters like actress Jennifer Lopez and other celebrities in a series of rallies and voter registration events aimed at inspiring early and mail-in voting.
哈里斯表示，这次选举的利害关系特别重大，强调每一票都很重要。
Harris has argued that the stakes in this election are especially high, emphasizing that every vote counts.
另一方面，特朗普的竞选活动则致力于增加农村和郊区选民的投票率，尤其是那些在此前选举中支持他的选民。
On the other side, Trump's campaign has been working to increase turnout among rural and suburban voters, particularly those who supported him in previous elections.
特朗普的做法包括在多个摇摆州的巡回宣传，在这些地方举行集会并推出新政策，以激发他的基本盘支持者的热情。
Trump's approach includes a multi-state tour focused on swing states, where he has held rallies and introduced new policy proposals to energize his base.
此外，特朗普一直通过他的社交媒体平台推动大规模的催票活动，呼吁他的支持者发出自己的声音。
In addition, Trump has been promoting a large-scale Get Out the Vote campaign through his social media platform, appealing to his supporters to make their voices heard.
同时，社交媒体公司和联邦机构正积极努力打击选举虚假信息。
Meanwhile, social media companies and federal agencies are actively working to combat election misinformation.
包括 Meta、Twitter 和微软在内的公司推出了新计划，旨在检测和对抗外国行为体的虚假信息行为。
Companies like Meta, Twitter, and Microsoft have launched new programs designed to detect and counter disinformation efforts by foreign actors.
微软的研究团队已经标记出国家支持的行为者的虚假信息显著增加，这些行为者包括俄罗斯、中国和伊朗，似乎正利用 AI 生成的内容操纵在线叙事。
Microsoft's research team has flagged a significant uptick in misinformation from state-sponsored actors, including Russia, China, and Iran, which appear to be using AI-generated content to manipulate online narratives.
这些社交媒体公司已经实施了新的措施来识别和阻止这些内容，强调这些虚假信息可能会影响公众意见，最终影响投票率。
These social media companies have implemented new measures to identify and block such content, emphasizing that this misinformation could influence public opinion and ultimately impact voter turnout.
美国政府机构也在与这些平台合作，共享数据，并努力防止外国势力干扰选举。
U.S. government agencies are also collaborating with these platforms, sharing data and working to prevent foreign interference in the election.
随着选举日临近，民调显示竞争激烈。
As we approach Election Day, polls indicate a close race.
经济、医疗保健、外交政策和工作的未来是选民最关心的议题。每位候选人都为美国的未来道路提供了不同的愿景。
The economy, healthcare, foreign policy, and the future of work are at the forefront of voters' minds, with each candidate offering distinct visions for America's path forward.
全国在几个关键问题上意见分歧，但可以确定的是，选民期待能够解决他们的及时关切，同时确保长期稳定和增长的领导力。
The nation remains divided on several key issues. But what's clear is that voters are looking for leadership that can address their immediate concerns while ensuring long-term stability and growth.
在几天内，美国人将投票，对最重要的议题表达他们的意见。
In a matter of days, Americans will cast their ballots and make their voices heard on the issues that matter most.
这次选举将以深刻的方式塑造国家未来。我们将在结果开始出现时持续提供报道，伴随国家进入下一章节。
This election stands to shape the future of the nation in profound ways, and we will be here with continued coverage as results begin to come in and the country charts its next chapter.
以上就是今天关于国内问题及其对选举影响的更新。
That's all for this update on domestic issues and their impact on the election.
请继续关注我们，为您带来更多深入分析和全天的最新新闻更新。
Stay with us as we bring you more in-depth analysis and breaking news updates throughout the day.
以上新闻资讯整理自孔雀台，由 iGo News 编辑播报。感谢您的收听，期待与您空中再会。
The above news information is compiled from a Peacock channel and presented by iGo News. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to your continued company on the air.